Thanks a lot for accepting our invitation. We already did a walk on the terrace. You met a few entrepreneurs, a few innovators, and actually I just asked a few of them what they thought of the discussion with you, and they said that they found you open, curious, and listening to them. So I guess this is what, as citizen, we could expect of a deputy minister. So thanks a lot again for accepting this invitation and for having this cool mind, because we have a lot of ambition for social change, and we really believe that digital can bring lots of wonderful social change. And so we are really happy to have this little conversation with you. So maybe just in a few words, how do you see France right now, and how do you feel that digital can bring positive social change in France?
Well, first, thank you very much for inviting me and for your warm welcome. I'm very happy to be here, and if I'm here, as you said, and as the people I've met already said, I'm here to learn and to listen and to observe and to hear and to meet and to, yes, I think we're into a sort of live laboratory of social innovation, and it's very important that the government remains completely open to new initiatives taken in France and across Europe. And this movement is one of them. France is a leader, and so I don't even know how you say économie collaborative.
The collaborative economy.
Is it cooperative or
collaborative
economy? I come from a more traditional background, which is law, trade, and politics. But then I realize I'm very sensitive to your approach. First, because I find it extremely sincere, and that you have objectives that I share. Sincere in the sense that you're always reflecting on yourself and your place in the world and what kind of world you want to live in. And this is also the way I want to work as a minister. And in the objectives, because you're working by pursuing an interest, which is not only a private and an individual one. That doesn't mean that it's not necessarily lucrative, that you're not here to make money. And good if you do, I mean, because making money and making business means that you could create jobs, which is a huge priority. But clearly there are very strong shared values behind that movement. And I think we're with the crisis of the economy, but also social crisis and crisis of democracies. There's a lack of sense at the moment. And instinctively, people feel that. And as a person working in the government, I have a duty to be aware of this lack of sense and to try to give sense to where we're trying to lead the country. So just to say that I really share the approach and the objectives.
How collaborative economy could help today the government to achieve the public interest, this general interest that is sometimes had the sense that it's being lost for the citizens? How can we help to do that? How the project here can do that?
I think you're an illustration and an attempt to accompany a transition which is a very global one. Transition to nation states, to a world that has become globalized, and so where the states and national citizens try to find their place in that new globalized world, but also in more economic terms. We're at the end of an era, which is the post-industrial era, and we're entering the digital era. This is happening extremely quickly, and it's changing the way we create, the way we produce, and the way we consume. And so you clearly, what you're representing is at the heart of that transition. And my role is to ensure that that transition, which is happening, it's not, I can't be blind, it is happening, is to make it as smooth as possible. So the digital industry is not here to destroy jobs and destroy more traditional industries, but it could happen if we don't anticipate and if we don't make the effort of thinking how we could integrate internet tools and the sort of digital mind, digital approach of stakeholder, multi-stakeholder system, of new way of working together, of new way of sharing resources where they've become so rarefied that we have no other choice. So again, I think it's in government, my role is to accompany that transition. That's where you can help me. So how I can help you, I'm not sure yet. I'm not exactly certain how this can translate into political terms. It is clearer when it comes to democracy. I had a very interesting discussing about this morning here. It's how can Parliament and governments recreate a link with citizens when there is so much distrust in politics, which is the perfect ground for the rise of extremism. And again, you're with all the hope that you're bringing with you and all the collective mind that you have, we have to find ways of working together to reconnect with citizens. So, but that's one part of the job. The economic one, I know that it's going to be passed very soon. There's a piece of, it's not legislation, but a decree that is going to pass on crowdfunding, and France is leading in that sector. I think it's great because if we want to encourage initiatives at the local level, and if we want to encourage to promote the creation of companies which are small businesses and small projects, well, we need to find resources not only through big banks and not only through investment funds, and there's also value behind crowdfunding. People want to invest because they share the values of the project they're investing in. So so that's one concrete example or where the government can intervene. So for the moment, we're at an early stage. I'm here to learn, listen, observe, and then the next stage will be how do we translate that politically speaking.
Do you think that open democracy, open government can help to achieve these objectives?
That's what I was trying to touch upon a little bit. I'm convinced that with the information flowing so rapidly, there's a real problem, timing problem, in the fact that democracies are slow. To pass a piece of legislation, it takes months. In France, it first has to go to the National Assembly, and then it's examined by the Senate. And then it goes back to the National Assembly, and then if the two chambers disagree, we have to set up a special committee. And all this, it takes time, and that price of democracy is not understood any longer, because it's all about making announcements, it's about reacting to the news which are so rapid, and that's where open democracy can help, because it's more continuous, it's more, we don't only legislate on one subject and at one point in time, generally when it's too late, but we're in constant contact with citizens to know what their needs are, what their opinions are, and so we're more reactive. And therefore more accountable. So I think, and again, we have to reflect on the tools. How do we do that? I don't believe very much in direct democracy. I think referendums, if they're overused, can be risky and dangerous because it's very easy to manipulate opinions. And I still think that parliamentarian democracy is the best system, not a perfect one, probably the least worst of all. But in that framework, we have to find tools to develop open democracy.
So there are now new startups and new sectors emerging that are disrupting existing industries, like peer-to-peer ride sharing in the city, or Uber against taxis, or also Airbnb and against the hotel industry. So how can you as a government support new startups and new industries emerging while also not hurting too much the old industries? How do you see this interaction between the new economy and the old industries?
Well, the first to start with, I'm convinced that if some initiatives are successful, it's because there was a need. So if there was a need, maybe it's because that need was not well covered but by what you called old industries. So it's a challenge, but if we see it in a positive way, it also can be a source of innovation for those older industries. So in a way, it can have a positive effect on their capacity to react to changes in innovation and to understand that it's becoming quicker and quicker, and they have to adapt their internal structures in order to respond to those very rapidly changing needs. That's the first thing. My concern as a member of the government is to ensure that there's not a frontal confrontation between that older world and the newer one, although I don't like the expression so much, because there's a potential of job destruction here, and we have to be lucid about that. We can share the objectives, but we have to all ensure that this is accompanied and promoted in a way that doesn't destruct jobs in other sectors, or that the transition, as I said earlier, is smooth enough in the long term for the price to be paid not to be too high. So the biggest challenge is to find a place for that kind of collaborative economy in a model and a system which is still, at least at the moment, very capitalistic. So I think there's a place for it, and there's a business model possibly behind it, and so we really have to think together on how to promote that, but by ensuring that this doesn't go against some national legislations which are protective, and they're not protective just to be regulating, they're protective to ensure that they protect jobs. So, but I think you probably share what I'm trying to say.
And so concretely, how do we do that? How do we also engage with policymakers so that they realize the opportunity within new emerging industries and not being sometimes too focused on regulating new industries and with the objective of keeping jobs, because especially in France, sometimes we have this feeling that not always policymakers are aware of the digital transformation that is happening, and so what is your responsibility also as Deputy Minister for Digital Affairs to transmit this understanding in other ministries?
Well, I'm here to learn, but I'm also here to explain what I learned to my colleagues. So I'm a transmitter. And then I try to give impulse and to suggest ideas to my colleagues, be it the education minister, the energy minister, the transport minister, the culture minister. And what is interesting, and I think this is new, it wouldn't have happened 3 or 4 years ago. They all come to see me and ask, how can we work together? Because they all realize that within their own portfolio, there is a digital dimension, and they will succeed or fail according also to the importance they will be able to give to that digital dimension. So, and so it's also, I've got a real, my job is to explain them the digital culture and talk to them about very concrete initiatives that are being taken. Do they understand, for example, the potential of co-working? We talk a lot about the deficit of France on exports. It is a real problem, especially if we compare ourselves to some of our closest partners. And we have big groups, big multinationals. They are pretty good. They're present in many countries, but the problem is that our small business and intermediary size business are not so efficient at exporting. Do they realize that rather than investing in salaries, in the renting of offices, in big structural investments, before even having done a study of the local markets, if they want to go abroad, do they realize that sharing workspace could be the solution? Because then you just send one person who gets to know the country, gets to know the commercial culture of the country, gets to know all the tricks that will help them to not fall into very common traps to develop their business abroad. So I think it's just one very concrete example where sharing spaces abroad for small businesses willing to export their products is clearly within the government strategy without the government realizing it. So that's where I get involved.
So the collaborative economy is emerging thanks to this wonderful digital transformation. It's also based on net neutrality, the idea that every person should have the same access to the web. How do you see the responsibility for government to make new laws emerging on this space? And for example, Brazil had a very interesting, very ambitious legislation based on net neutrality. Could we imagine the same legislation in France?
So I was in Sao Paulo when Dilma Rousseff, the president of Brazil, ratified the new Marco Civil law on the internet. So it was a very emotional moment. We tend to forget in France that we've led in Europe and at a broader scale as well in passing bills that were protective of personal data, for example, or of when we created the CADA, the administration in charge of administrative documents. So the first bill we passed on personal data, it was in 1978. And from there, other countries started that process. Brazil didn't have one single law on the internet and the digital economy. So they're starting now, and we started 30 years ago. So I just want to insist on that, not to think that we're behind. In that regard, I think we were pioneers. When it comes to net neutrality, I think the principle itself creates very passionate debates. I'm always surprised to see how irrational it can become and how difficult it is to reconcile people who want, and they are right to do so, to defend liberties on the internet, just as they would in the non-virtual world, and how the lobbies, but also people who are pro-innovation, think that a perfect net neutrality could deter innovation. So we have to find a balance. I think at this stage, and given what's happening in other countries, especially in the States, it is important that France asserts the principle of net neutrality. Should it be called like that? I'm not sure. But this idea that the internet needs to be open and accessible to all, I think it's, I talked of a transition. It really is a question of what kind of internet we want for the future. And do we want a space that is governed by private companies only, or do we want a space that is a guarantee for liberties and that is a guarantee for private initiatives to flourish? So the balance is difficult to find. If you ask me now, today, would I like to see that principle passed into a bill? My answer is yes. How exactly would that be translated in the law? I'm not sure yet. We also have debates at the European level, and I think in a way, in that sector, what we do in France can have an influence on what the other European countries do, but the impact, and especially the economic impact, is rather limited. So the biggest challenge is to find an agreement at the European level. And so, of course, we want to influence our partners, convince them, but I know it's going to be a hard task.
Thank you very much, Madame la Ministre. You share a lot of our values, actually. So I think you can be part of We Share today. Thank you very much for having answered this question. I just would like to repeat what Antonin said at the beginning. You have a lot of attention and curiosity, and it's absolutely wonderful. So we're very happy to see you today here. And please, yeah.
Thank you.
Upload.
Thank you and good luck.